There's always so much to discuss in Britain and also in the rest of the Western world. And I'm especially looking forward to this episode because joining us is Dr. Thomas Scheck and his son Peter Scheck in Ave Maria, Florida. Not only are they truly wonderful human beings, they are also very insightful, they are very knowledgeable and very experienced. And given what, in my opinion, is pure evil, which is confronting Britain and the rest of the Western world at the moment, such as the normalization of paedophilia, I believe that people such as Tom and Peter have a very important story to tell.
That's a very big billing there, Tom and Peter. You're under pressure to deliver now. Welcome to Unprecedented TV. How long have you known Marcus to get such a powerful valedictory speech?
I've known Marcus for, I think, about 5 years. I became interested in learning about Russia and Russia's relationship with Europe. I would say maybe about 10 years ago, I started following global politics a little more carefully. I taught German at Ave Maria University, and just through teaching German, I felt like I needed to know, at least a little bit about European politics, German politics. And so I tried to get caught up and learn, and stay informed. That was probably, 2013, 2014. And then I came across Marcus's work, his commentaries, his interviews with RT. And I just came to admire Marcus Papadopoulos as an incredibly brave spokesman, and also very knowledgeable. And so I tried to leave comments, when I would listen to his interviews, and learned that he had published the book on Arise Russia, and tried to, leave comments on the book, I think on Amazon. And somehow Marcus was able to track me down and emailed me when I was still a professor at Ave Maria University. And so we became email correspondents. And I guess I don't really feel that I'm much of an expert in the matters of global politics, but I admire those who are. And so I feel very much, a disciple, that Marcus is kind of my mentor and in these matters. And so we corresponded for a number of years. And my son, Peter, also has become very interested in these matters as well. And so over the course of the years, we kind of grew close to Marcus. And then when Peter got married back in 2024, Marcus was invited and he came over to the wedding. So his first time in the United States. And we just had a wonderful week together. We picked him up at the Miami airport, and he just kind of got a taste of the United States and of Florida. And so we've felt very close to Marcus and his family. And my son Peter actually took his honeymoon in England, and so got to see Marcus right after the wedding as well.
You've probably been, Peter, you and I have probably been within a few miles of each other, because one of the other coincidences here is that I actually live about half an hour's drive from Marcus. So there's a There are not many degrees of separation going on here. It's quite impressive. The team was putting up, I think, the Naples College, but they found something from Ave Maria as well. Is that anything to do with it? That looks like a church to me.
Yep. Yeah, that's where we go to church.
Ah, right. It's a magnificent looking building.
Thanks. Yeah, this is southern Florida, so they have to build things weatherproof that can withstand hurricanes. So it's to my mind, it's maybe not the most attractive structure in the world, but it's made to endure direct hits from hurricanes.
I have to say, I think it's pretty impressive. What do you think, Marcus? Is that where you got married? By the way.
No, I got married in a small church in Naples because the priest that did our wedding was stationed over there. But this is where we go on most Sundays. So
it's a beautiful place. What do you think of it, Marcus?
I particularly like it on the inside. There are some very interesting designs, and the tabernacle, in my opinion, is especially beautiful.
Mm-hmm. It is. I think it's really, really impressive. Just so that we can move on from it, the team kept putting up the Naples College. This is to do with you, Peter, isn't it?
No, this is my dad's.
Oh, right. I see
that now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I teach.
And what age groups do you teach?
I teach 6th grade through high school. Mm-hmm. And I primarily teach Latin. It's a charter school that has kind of a unique curriculum compared to most state schools. It does offer Latin from 6th grade onward, and so my PhD training was in classics, and so it's a blessing to be able to teach, something that I know well, that's within about a 30-minute drive from my house. So, yeah, I've been teaching there for the last 4 years.
I have to say, you all make me feel desperately underqualified. My father was a doctor. My grandfather was a professor. My sister's far better qualified than me. I've got something in common with you, because I've actually got a philosophy degree, but I never took it past just having a philosophy degree. I suppose it's quite cool to have a philosophy degree because I think it's the study of thinking. But you people collectively have so much more collective intellect. I just wish, this is a political view, I just wish that our British government had the 24 of them on the cabinet or thereabouts had the same kind of intellect as I've got in this group here. Marcus, you're a doctor, aren't you, as well?
Of Russian history, yes.
That's pretty impressive, yeah. And you've actually written another book as well, haven't you?
Yes, 2 books. My first book was Arise Russia, The Return of Russia to World Politics. And my second book is called Whitehall in Stalin's Russia, British Assessments of the Red Army, 1934 to 1945. Whitehall in Stalin's Russia received a number of endorsements from senior US Army and Air Force officers, which I was absolutely thrilled about.
I thought they might accuse you of being, in a McCarthyist way, if viewers don't know what that means, look it up. McCarthyism, quite an interesting time in American history. I thought they might think that you're working for the Russians, Marcus.
Do you know, maybe once they might have, but given what is happening in America and indeed in the rest of the Western world, very many Americans have woken up. Very many Americans are now questioning not just the official narrative of the American government, of the British government, of NATO, of the European Union, but they are also questioning everything they have been told since they entered primary school. So I'm very, very encouraged by what is happening in both America and Britain. Yes, the situation in both countries is extremely grave. What with, for example, the normalization of paedophilia.
Now,
the
what do you mean?
introduction-
What do you mean by that? Because you've said that a couple of times. What do you mean by normalization of paedophilia?
Yes. Well, it was a few years ago when I became the first person in Britain to say on television that paedophilia is being normalized. And this began in America because what we see now is paedophilia being rebranded as minor attracted people. Now, that is, in my opinion, the lowest of the low. There is no rational explanation for that. There is no human element in that. I am a Christian. I will always look for a rational explanation for something. But in my opinion, and in most people's opinions, there is nothing rational about the normalization of paedophilia. It is without any doubt evil in a biblical sense.
Let's start with this then. And I want to make sure that your students are able to access what we produce. So let's be mindful of language and content. But Tom, Peter, that's a big statement from Marcus. I've lay my cards on the table. I'm tremendously concerned about dark turns being taken in the name of wokeness, which actually don't create tolerance, but create danger and actually suppress people who say the kind of thing that Marcus has just said. Where do you stand on this, Peter and Tom?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'm coming out this from a little bit different background for most people. I was a seminarian, Catholic seminarian for 4 years, studying to be a Catholic priest. When I entered, and obviously since I've started out and got married, but when I started in seminary in 2018, that literally days before I entered, there was a scandal involving a Catholic cardinal in Philadelphia who had been exposed for having abused, like decades of having abused minor boys or whatever. And so it was a very difficult time to enter the seminary because, this was making headlines. Another big, probably the biggest scandal since the 2006 Boston scandal. And the first thing they told us at orientation was, how to deal with reporters and how to deal with someone spitting in your face in the street. And it was very much a gut check. We were all very excited to get, a new next step in our lives, and a little bit scary, but also kind of an adventure. And you're excited to kind of see what the Lord does in your life. And immediately took the wind out of our sails just by, immediately being thrown in the same ring as these really, really disgusting people. And, obviously it's a scandal. And so and I think Marcus is right. I think like the wokeism leading to the popularization of like drag shows, and especially like drag shows involving children to become so popular, and for people that criticize it to become so demonized immediately. People have very short-term memory. It was only a couple years ago where we were demonizing the Catholic Church for pedophile priests. And now I haven't heard any scandal, and I'm sure it hasn't necessarily gone anywhere. I haven't heard anything in the news about, a pedophilic scandal involving a priest or a Protestant minister or whatever religion, or gymnastics coach or, whoever the Boy Scout master, whoever the main culprits historically have been. I haven't heard any stories of criminal activity from that typical group of guys. But instead it's people bragging about taking their kids to drag shows and drag parades and stuff like that. So that, the short-term memory of the culture is pretty astounding to go from, you're evil because you do that to you're evil because you judge me for doing that. And I think, especially in the post-COVID world where like social media, which was always popular, has just become such a staple in the diets of, kids from, younger and younger age groups. And we've seen how, Instagram and Roblox and these big platforms, they're just, they're safaris for pedophiles. as obviously as teachers, it's, it's concerning because, this is, a lot of our kids, obviously, is a big part of their life.
Yeah.
And so we should be the protectors, as much as we can, working with the parents. And so for this to be so prevalent and so, celebrated in many cases is, obviously very disturbing. And it makes you wonder, like, what else, when you look at big, cultural issues that are very divisive and involve, attacking the family or attacking the child or this or that demographic. You wonder, it seems like the devil's like running out of ideas. And so, the normalization of like homosexual marriage, obviously was a big, wherever you, not to disenfranchise any of your viewers, but like wherever you stand on that, that was a big moment in history, at least in the West. And then the next big step would be like abortion. And we've seen it just snowball. And obviously with the transgender movement and pedophilia, you wonder what, like, you'd think like this is, killing the baby would be like the last attack on the family the devil can pull off. And he's still finding ways to attack us. And so it makes you wonder, the forces that are, legalizing this and promoting this, what do they worship when they go home? Right.
So, Tom, there are many in the woke community, the people who think that we should live in a relativistic world where everything's acceptable, who would potentially be appalled at what Peter said. How dare you criticize us for these views? How dare you say that or infer that homosexual marriage is wrong? We do seem to be in a society now where people get censored, and a lot of people self-censor because they're worried that they're going to be demonized or cancelled or accused of bigotry. Well, what's your experience of this as an educationalist and as a person of faith?
Yeah, it's a very sad reality. I recalled growing up Catholic, and my parents, they did attend church. We attended church, but they kind of stayed on the periphery. And I recall that my mom was not really very comfortable with some of the priests in the church that I grew up in. And several of these priests were defrocked. They were expelled from the priesthood because of their behavior. They were molesting, young boys. And thank God I was not affected by that personally. I guess I kind of learned about it when I was in college, that some of these kind of weird, effeminate priests were actually predators. And it was it's a very sad thing that the Catholic Church endured this horrible crisis. I departed from the Catholic Church when I was in college. I was 18, and I met evangelical Protestants when I was in college. And so I left the Catholic Church and I joined the evangelical Protestant movement. And I was away from the Catholic Church for about 17 years. Eventually I came back, but I do see that there was a terrible crisis in the church in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. And I'm very ashamed, of this. I guess, I am a practicing Catholic. I do believe my religion, but I'm also a person who has been through darkness and doubt. And so I feel like, yes, I am a religious person. I'm a practicing Catholic. I go to church, but I I have just barely survived the assaults of the devil, and doing what I can to persevere. But I don't consider myself very strong in faith. I feel very weak, but
arguably the Catholic Church has some of the finest organizational structures of any religion in the world. The Vatican is just it's a masterpiece of religiously orientated engineering. I'm sure you've been there. I certainly have, and you go in and you can't help but be impressed. Even if you were a complete atheist, you'd be impressed with the thing. And I wonder if one of the problems for religion is this: if the Catholic Church, with all its finery, all its glamorous constructions, with its own city in Rome, the Vatican City, smallest country in the world, with all of that, if they can end up doing what Peter and you have both described, and which Marcus raised because we're discussing this thanks to Marcus's comment, then why should anyone really have faith in faith?
Yeah, I think, to that original question about bigotry and the culture of relativism, I think relativism died with George Floyd. I think that was definitely the moral, the biggest moral quandary, that was presented to us as like high school students. This is what you're going to have to deal with in the streets, is relativism. And people think that nothing is objective, and it's what's true for you is not necessarily true for me. I think that's dead. I think cancel culture is proof that relativism doesn't fly anymore. It's what the woke, the globalist, whatever you want to call it, right? The people that, like, those promoters, they're right and we're wrong. And if you're not going to get on board, that's, you're canceled. That's not relativism. They've taken a side, right? That's it from their perspective. That's objective. And yeah, I think to your point about like, if the people who claim to be carrying on the legacy of Jesus Christ are, susceptible to this kind of evil and sin, then yeah, what is the point? Like, if God can't protect us from this, why, what difference does it make? And I think, ultimately, like, the answer, we look to the cross, right? I remember going through that orientation in seminary and having this visceral thought of, like, seeing this guy's name in the headline and thinking, like, I don't want to get crucified next to that guy. That's not the job I signed up for. And it's like, no, yes, it freaking is. That's exactly the job you signed up for. If you're conformed to the heart of Jesus, if you're a follower of Jesus, that is exactly the job you signed up for. That's very painful, but it's also very freeing, because it's, ultimately the burden doesn't fall on me. The burden's already been paid for. Jesus already paid for this. How to follow him day to day in the moment and fight this at the level that, the Lord's put in our path or whatever, that's everyone's personal discernment. And that's why, voices like Marcus are so important. And it shows people show their true colors when they criticize voices like that.
But just before we go further, a word on the new Pope Leo, is that right? He's
Leo the 14th, yeah.
Yeah. He seems to me, I've never met him. I've funny enough never met a Pope, actually. But I get the impression that he's fairly savvy. I'm not sure why quite I feel that way, but I do get the impression that he's trying to do good things, but it must be quite difficult, because you end up with competition. You're fighting the darker forces. We've got quite heavily into religion, quite deeply. I actually used to work in what I considered to be a monastery in Ohio. I think, were you there, Tom, in Ohio? Which of you was there?
I was there. I was there for 3 years.
Yeah. I work at a monastery there. Do you know what that's an altar to?
No, I don't.
That is the capital of Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati.
Huh.
That is their world headquarters. I worked for them. They're a great company. And I mention them for two reasons. First of all, I very fond memories of working in Procter & Gamble, and I could have done the distance there. Very principled company. But the second reason is because there was this relentless claim that Procter & Gamble somehow had a demonic contact, and people would find 666 in the logo and so on. It was preposterous. Procter & Gamble is the most principled organization I've ever worked for. But what's interesting about what we're discussing here is the willingness to abuse religion to contain other groups. Now, I think P&G does, I'm not in their pay now, but I would say that they do a lot more good than harm. I would say that genuine believers do a lot more good than harm. But we get the waters muddied, and viewers may feel this, where the kind of darkness you've described, Tom and Peter and Marcus, has made it difficult for people who don't study theology closely, who don't study religion closely, to be unable to it makes it hard for them to trust anyone of religion, because they have heard the stories about the Catholic Church, and not confined just to Catholic people of cloth. What do we do? What's the solution?
Well, one of the things that I feel very grateful to the Catholic Church for is that it provides guidance for its people in the form of the catechism of the Catholic Church, where the Church provides its teaching very clearly, its moral teaching, and it's like a reference point for our faith. And this is something that I did not find as an evangelical pastor and Protestant. I felt like it was kind of up to me as the pastor to define everything and answer, all the questions, where with the Catholic Church, we have the teaching defined for us in the form of a catechism that preserves the standpoint of the church over the course of the centuries. And so I thank God for the guidance that the church gives us. And then, the Pope is a living teacher of the church, a living voice, providing us, further guidance when new things come up. But I really feel grateful and proud of the church's courage to take its stand publicly in that form, and I find it very coherent and clear. So I'm grateful for that aspect.
But Marcus, with your simple comments, you've used 2/3 of the show already. There's no way we're going to get everything covered here. What do you think about the hare that you've set running?
I believe that all of the churches in the world have been infiltrated by dark, malignant forces. For example, the Church of England. In no way can anyone reasonably argue that the Church of England is a true church. Only recently, the Canterbury Cathedral allowed its walls on the inside to be subjected to graffiti for the sake of diversity. So there is nothing remotely Christian about the Church of England. And all these evil acts, which we see being not just committed in the Western world, but condoned and encouraged, is not, of course, the work of God. It's not the work of Jesus Christ. It is the work of human beings who have succumbed to the temptation of depravity, who have succumbed to the temptation of sin. And something we need to be very aware of is this. In America and in Britain, for example, when we say luxuries, the average person is talking about how many houses they have, how many cars they have, how many holidays they have. Whereas in a country such as Bulgaria or Serbia, when people there talk about luxuries, they are referring to God, church, family, and friends. That is where the Western world has gone so very, very wrong. The day when, for example, Britons lost their faith in Christianity and failed to defend their culture was the day when the dark, malignant forces which rule Britain gained an advantage over them. And from there, we see the horrific carnage which is now occurring in Britain. Yes, there is a Christian revival in Britain. Yes, there is a cultural revival in Britain. That I applaud. But my word, the damage which has been inflicted in Britain is absolutely colossal. However, it is never too late. The fact that Britons are returning to God is something which is a grave concern to the British ruling elite, because that is not what they want.
That's fascinating. I want to. You're going to have to come back, people, because we're never going to finish everything in the next few minutes. But Tom, I want to talk a little bit about that college of yours in Naples. There, I always think of Naples in Italy. My late mother and I had a wonderful stay there. It's kind of a rundown city, but it's got shabby chic, I think is the phrase. Maybe that's an out-of-date phrase now. Do you talk about these things at your school, Tom, with your pupils?
Not really. I primarily teach Latin at different levels. And so I'm pretty much limited to giving that instruction. I know, there's also history and civics and other subjects that are taught where those issues come up, but it just so happens that all of my classes are basically different levels of Latin. So,
I've got another secret to share. I actually studied Latin to the age of 16, and I did it because I was just interested. And the priceless benefit of speaking some Latin is you can work out words you don't understand. If you've learned Latin, you have a better than evens chance of working out a lot of words in a lot of different languages. And what I liked about it was learning about the structure, because it tells us so much about how English and American were two countries divided by a common language, I think is the phrase, but how it works. It's a niche sport, Latin. You don't get it in many state schools in Britain. But I'm very impressed, to be honest with you, Tom.
Yeah, in some ways it's a relief, because it's objective and it's not controversial, But I think Peter in his teaching encounters much more of the cultural issues in the classroom, and he has to be more careful, I think, in what he says and that type of thing.
Is that right, Peter?
Yeah, I've had my wrist slapped a couple times. But so yeah, I've taught, currently I'm not teaching Latin or Spanish. I'm actually teaching Greek, in addition to medieval history and literature. It's my first year teaching Latin. That particular group of kids was, they were, their parents watch mainstream media, so they've got, they were plugged into real world events, through a current, through a certain stream of media information, whatever. So they'd always start class asking, what do you think about blah blah blah? They don't want to do class, right? They want to talk about the news. And they knew that they could get me off track. And then when I was teaching Spanish, I was a missionary in Central America for a couple of years, as well as France. And so a lot of my stories and anecdotes teaching Spanish were much more like real world related to, my experience traveling through, the Mexican government or the Nicaraguan government or, stuff like that. So that kind of more organically lent itself to broader conversations about geopolitics. And then in my history classes, so the 10th graders, it's medieval history and literature. And the cool thing for me, I try to emphasize the English language as much as possible. So we teach Beowulf, and I make them learn the Our Father in Old English, for example. We do other works as well, but I always get the bilingual whenever I can. At the end of the year, we'll do Sir Gawain and the Green Knight in Pearl. And so they'll get Middle English. I'll make them learn the Our Father in Middle English. And then we get plenty of Shakespeare sprinkled out their education. So
one of the best plays I ever saw in my life, and I saw it in 1986, so 39 years ago, was Beowulf. It was a student production, but it was so well done, so darkly faithful to the intended messaging and the, to use a really big word, aesthetic nature of Beowulf, and almost the hopelessness in a way, the fatalistic way that it's presented, that I was cold. Even though it was a warm theatre, I was cold. I think Beowulf is just a remarkable thing.
I'm in love with it. I grow more in love with it every time I read it. Yeah, I'm super blessed to be able to teach this stuff. I guess the only other note where my teaching, like medieval history, kind of touches on current geopolitics would be things like in the Holy Land. So kind of like early church history, and then like the Crusades and anything touching in, Jerusalem. I'm very passionate about Palestine. So I'm just very clear with them. Like, guys, we're not going to get off track, but just so we're clear, we're not, I'm going to say Palestine or Holy Land. I'm not going to say Israel. Zionism is not a thing yet. Regarding like the temple and stuff like that, just because those things, they may hear those words, in the news, depending what they're exposed to at home. I think the pendulum is swinging. I think, on October 8th, 2023, I was the bad guy for saying that, this is more complicated than you think, guys. And a couple years later, it's much more like, oh crap, Mr. Sheck might have been right. So is what it is. And same for, Ukraine, Russia stuff. It's like, you're the bad guy the day after the special military operation, but a couple years out, now they're the ones asking questions about Zelensky. So it is what it is. We try to, my job, I struggle with, determining, what's appropriate for them, and then what's appropriate for them in this space. I'm not a geopolitics teacher. I teach medieval history and language. I need to reverence that and be respectful of my role. But at the same time, if we're going to prepare these kids to go out into the real world, again, it's just like you said at the beginning of the show. It's history and fact. It's not emotions. It just so happens that a lot of historical facts are very emotional. So that's kind of how I work through that.
Another boring day in paradise wouldn't have made a great chapter in the Bible. As somebody said to me once, I'm going to give Marcus a chance to summarize in a minute, but just two lighter points. You've got a 5-month-old son, Peter, Maximus.
I do. Maximus Jude. Yeah, we spell Maximus with an OS.
Is he named after
well,
Gladiator?
So yes and no. So I've been a big Gladiator fan my entire life. We actually we spell it with an OS at the end. So the Greek spelling after Saint Maximus the Confessor, who's he's a canonized saint. He's much more popular in the Byzantine or the Orthodox world. He's kind of the equivalent of like Thomas Aquinas for the East. He was roughly a contemporary of Muhammad, actually. So he's born, his date's like 580 to 662, and big defender of orthodoxy. He was exiled for speaking out against the monothelitism heresy. And anyway, so Maximus in the Greek, it's Omicron Sigma, but also my son was like, he was like over 4.5 kilos when he was born. He's a big boy. So in the hospital, they were like, Maximus is a good name. He's huge.
No, you'll have to take him to the forum sometime. If only to relive the film.
Planning on it, yeah. We've taken him to Mexico when he was 3 months. We went to a wedding down there. So we'll see when we can get to Europe again. I had the best mango I've ever eaten in Mexico, and topped it off by getting dysentery in Caracas. But that's another story. And one for you. This is more of a teaser than anything else, Tom. I think it relates to you, Tom. I could be wrong.
But I believe that this fellow here is of interest to one of you. Is it Peter or you, Tom?
Mostly him. I like him because of him.
All right. Yeah, Oregon of Alexandria. Don't go into it now, but I'm very interested to understand why you're so interested in this fellow. I recognize you used the word niche. Could be a niche interest. I think faith and spirituality should be a core interest. That would be a healthy thing for people to put at the center of their lives, rather than endlessly obsessing about sexual orientation and those things which are important, but they're not the meaning of life themselves. So maybe next time the question I'll ask you, Tom, and I will be indulging myself, is what difference you see in Origen of Alexandria's work versus Thomas Aquinas. Don't answer it now, though, because that'll be a whole show. But it is fascinating, and I've got a whole heap of questions there. But in fairness, since it's due to the kind offices of Marcus Papadopoulos that we're all here, Marcus, do you want to risk trying to summarize what we may have learned in this episode?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that Zionist Israel is not biblical Israel, and biblical Israel is most certainly not Zionist Israel. They have nothing in common with each other. They are two separate entities, and I only wish many evangelicals would come to understand that. In regard to our discussion, I want to thank you, Lembit, for hosting it, and I wish to thank Tom and Peter for participating in it. I think that prior to what I call the plandemic, not many people would have paid much attention to what we have discussed in this discussion, because it has been very religion oriented. But as a result of what I refer to also as the COVID catalyst, and because people in the Western world simply cannot understand the attacks which are being launched on them by the dark entities which rule them, and because they are so fearful, because they are so desperate, because they have come to the realization that all that is taking place in the Western world today is unprecedented, they are turning to God. They are turning to the Bible. They are turning to Christianity, or they are returning to God, the Bible, and Christianity. So what we have today discussed will resonate with a lot of people, and that is a very important development. As I said moments ago, yes, we are facing oblivion in Britain and in America and in the rest of the Western world. But if we return to God, or if we find God, and if we ensure that we have a relationship with God and Jesus, and we make that very public, then we will start a very serious fight back against these dark entities, because these dark entities in control of America and Britain and continental Europe despise Christianity. They despise culture. They despise Western civilization. They could never have achieved what they have achieved without having taken down, for example, in Britain, Christianity. Now Christianity is on the rise again in Britain. They are fearful. That is why they are taking more monstrous measures to enslave the British people. So again, I wish to thank you, Lembit. I wish to thank Tom and Peter. I think it has been a very insightful and refreshing discussion, and it just goes to show that we are not alone. God and Jesus are with us. They are in all of us, and we have to remember that, and we have to say that openly, and there will be justice for all of us in the Western world one day.